Here we go. It's that time of the week again. As every Friday, we post the latest power rankings. This week, we are into week four. The first month of the NHL season. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and a subscribe, and let's take a look at week four's power rankings. All right, so here we go. So, week four of the power rankings. Let's get right down into it. Uh, Unfortunately, and maybe fortunately for others, there was a pretty big shakeup in this week's power rankings. A couple of teams that seemed to be coming on the rise last week really did not perform at the level that I think we were hoping they would this week. And a couple of teams that were pretty much at the bottom of the basement in terms of their division actually moved up a couple of spots. With the lone exception really being one in the Eastern Conference, the Atlantic Division didn't see a ton of movement, but we'll get into that when we get there. So, starting things off, we're going to start things off as we normally do in the Eastern Conference in the Metropolitan Division and staying at number 8. No shocks here. We have the New Jersey Devils staying at number 8 in this week's power rankings. They are 2-4-2 to start the season this year. They were 1-0 this week. They beat the Vancouver Canucks by a score of 1-0 at home earlier this week. A solid victory for the Devils. They are at that time where they have off, so they haven't played too much hockey over the past week. It's probably for the better. They did start to build up a little momentum. They did beat the New York Rangers. They played a couple of decent games here and there, but they did beat the Vancouver Canucks, who are a fairly solid team coming over from the Pacific Division. So a big victory there for the Devils, a shutout nonetheless. A very solid performance there by the Devils. Now, this is where things start to shake up a little bit. A team we saw in the top 3 back in week 1 and 2. Now here at week 4, slides all the way down to number 7. Not much to the fault of their own, but to a varying degree. We have at number 7, sliding down another 2 spots this week, are the New York Rangers at number 7 this week. 3-4-1 to start the season. 1-2-1 this week. They had a loss last weekend in Washington against the Capitals by a score of 5-2. They would lose at home. They would beat the Vancouver Canucks at home 3-2. They would go on to lose to the Arizona Coyotes 3-2 in overtime. But they did come back with a convincing victory at home, 6-2 over the Buffalo Sabres. So, what are the New York Rangers this year? Now, to me, the Vancouver game being a pretty solid game, they did lose to the New Jersey Devils as well on this road trip. So the Canucks seem to have these issues on the road, specifically on the East Coast. But nonetheless, the New York Rangers pick up an important victory there. They beat the Buffalo Sabres, who are arguably one of the best teams in the NHL right now, and in convincing fashion as well. But then they also lose to a team that's in their division, the Washington Capitals, on the road, 5-2. But they also lost to a Coyotes team here, who was on a 6-game point streak, which ended up ending after this game against the Rangers, and we'll get into that in a minute. But the Arizona Coyotes were a pretty solid team coming in as well. So it was a fairly tough week for the New York Rangers in terms of their schedule. So, again, they moved down. They didn't have a great week. They were 1-2-1 on the week, and that's just not good enough. Capo Caco seemed to struggle a little bit. He's starting to pick things up a little bit. Artemi Panarin is doing fairly well. Tony DeAngelo on the back end has really helped out the New York Rangers. And Henrik Lundqvist is playing good enough to keep the Rangers in most of their games. So the Rangers could easily move back up. I think they had a difficult schedule this week. They've been off for a while, so just trying to get back into the rhythm and getting the gears back into shape. It's going to take a little while, but I think the Rangers will be just fine. Looking at the Philadelphia Flyers at number 6, they stay at number 6. The Flyers are 4-3-1 on this season, 2-1 this week. They would lose a game at home over the Dallas Stars, who have really struggled, by a score of 4-1. They would beat the Vegas Golden Knights at home, though, in convincing fashion, 6-2. And they would also get a victory on the road in Chicago, a 4-1 victory. So a much better week an improved week for the Philadelphia Flyers. Some pretty convincing wins as well. The one outlier being that Dallas Stars game, which they were very frustrated that they lost that game. They seem to have used that to their advantage here, as they seem to be playing some pretty good hockey since then. Chicago does not seem to be one of the best teams in the NHL right now. They seem to be struggling. We'll talk about that. But they beat a Vegas Golden Knights team who's arguably one of the better teams in the Western Conference, and they played fairly well against those Vegas Golden Knights. And listen, the goaltending situation seems to be a little bit, we aren't sure what's going on. Carter Hart was the guy coming in, but we've seen, Brian Elliott come in and play a decent amount of games early in the season here. So it's going to be interesting to see the dynamic there with Carter Hart. Are they going to rush him in and put him in for 60 games this year, or are they going to maybe give him 40 or 50 again just so he can acclimate and continue to grow as an NHL starting goaltender? The only issue is I don't know how reliable Brian Elliott is at this point, and are you comfortable letting him play 30 to 40 games in an NHL season when the Flyers have expectations of making the playoffs this year? So taking a look at number 5, moving up 2 spots this week. This is one of probably the better teams this week in the NHL. We have the Columbus Blue Jackets, 5-3-2 on the season, and 2-0-2 this week. They would lose a game 3-2 in Chicago in an overtime game. They would lose to the Islanders at home on the second of the back-to-back on Saturday, 3-2 as well. They would head up to Toronto and get an overtime victory over the Leafs, 4-3, and another overtime victory last night in a very enjoyable game against the Carolina Hurricanes at home, where they would win 4-3 in overtime as well. So they played all their 4 games were either overtime past 60 minutes, and they did win a couple of them, but they also lost 2 as well. So a very solid week overall for the Columbus Blue Jackets. They pick up 6 points out of a possible 8 on the week. So the Columbus Blue Jackets, sitting pretty good right here, 5-3-2. They've got 12 points on the year. They're in a playoff spot right now. The Columbus Blue Jackets are playing for real right now, and this is a team definitely to keep an eye on next week. They need to continue to build off this momentum. They could easily slide right back down to 6 or 7 if they have a tough week next week, but we'll have to see what happens. They've stayed in the local area of Columbus with games in Chicago and Toronto, and then a couple of home games against the Islanders and the Hurricanes. So we'll see how they handle next week. But overall, a very nice week for the Blue Jackets. We've seen some of the depth really come into the fold and play some really good hockey. That defense is as good as it's been. Jonas Korpisalo is playing good enough to get the team some victories, and they're putting the puck in the back of the net and letting that cannon fire a couple of times a game and giving their team a chance. There's a team coming into the year that was supposed to bottom out as one of the worst teams. They're doing pretty well for themselves considering the amount of talent they lost last year. So taking a look at number 4, moving down 2 spots this week, we have the Pittsburgh Penguins at number 4, 6-5-0 on the season, and a pretty disappointing 1-3 this week. They would start the week with a 4-2 victory over the Dallas Stars. They would lose 3-0 to the Vegas Golden Knights as Marc-Andre Fleury and the Golden Knights came into Pittsburgh and put a shutout up on Crosby and the Pens. They would take a trip down to Florida, which has been a house of horrors for the Pittsburgh Penguins. They lose 4-2 in Florida against the Florida Panthers, and they also lose 3-2 against the Tampa Bay Lightning, and what was a very entertaining game there. But unfortunately, they did give up a late goal to Victor Hedman, and that ended up being the difference in the hockey game. Again, it's one of those things, you move down to 4. Considering the amount of injuries that they've had, guys have been coming back in the lineup and leaving the lineup and coming up from minors and going down to minors, and there hasn't been a lot of stability in Pittsburgh. So once these guys start, to get some chemistry and the lines are more set, I think Coach Sullivan will feel a little bit better about the situation with the team. I think overall the team's performance will get better. We see this all the time when you bring in a couple of guys that maybe just missed the roster, and it's early in the year too, so they definitely feel that hurt and that they have that motivation to get back. After playing in the preseason, playing in the NHL level, they want to get back to that. And then these guys come back in the roster, and some players just don't feel that same motivation or that energy earlier in the season. So that may be a little bit of a factor for the Penguins, considering the hangover. Again, this is years back, but the Pittsburgh Penguins have played a lot of hockey over the past, really the last 5 or 6 years, and a lot of those players still on Pittsburgh. So overall, 6-5 is not a bad record, but this was definitely not the week I was expecting from Pittsburgh to drop 3 or 4 games this week. So taking a look at number 3, moving up a spot, is the New York Islanders at number 3 in this week's Power Rankings. 6-3 on the season and a perfect 2-0 on the week. They played last Saturday in Columbus, a 3-2 overtime victory on the road in Columbus, as well as a victory over the Arizona Coyotes last night in a 4-2 victory. The Islanders are playing some very good hockey. They've had some injuries as well. Leo Komarov, Jordan Eberle, Casey Zizekas have been out of the lineup. They've brought in guys like Oliver Wahlstrom. Noah Dobson's played a little bit here and there. Cole Bardreau came up as well. So the team is finding ways to play the Islanders style, the way Lou Lamoriello wants things to be done on his hockey team. The team is performing. They're playing some really ugly games, and games that they probably should have lost over the last couple of weeks. The Columbus game, it really looked like Columbus was going to blow the doors off the Islanders in that the start of that third period. I believe the Islanders gave up 7 to 10 shots in the first 3 or 4 minutes, and the team just did not look right. We even saw last week against the St. Louis Blues where the Islanders stole one from those St. Louis Blues, and a game where I would say the opponent had the puck and had possession of the game for pretty much 85 to 90% of the game, and the Islanders were still able to find a way to come back. And a team that's not known for scoring a lot of goals, they've been able to score on the opportunities that they have been given. We definitely saw last night with the Islanders a certain amount of frustration due to the lack of penalties called in their favor. They've had a lot of penalties against them this season. They haven't had many power plays. Before last night, they had 1 power play last night, and before that, it was a game in Winnipeg, which was over a week ago, that the Islanders had a power play. So a very frustrating situation for the Islanders. I just hope that doesn't get to the team. They seem to believe in what Barry Trotz has brought, and they need to buy into that and continue to do what they've done. A very impressive start for a team that really, some would have considered would fall out of the playoffs after making the playoffs last year. The Islanders look pretty solid. Thomas Greiss and Semyon Varlamov are on 3 or 4 game winning streaks each right now. So the Islanders are playing some great hockey right now. We'll have to see how that continues moving forward. So now we have a little bit of a shakeup for the first time in the Metro. So at number 2, moving down a spot from the number 1 spot, we have the Carolina Hurricanes being dethroned at the top of the Metropolitan Division. The Carolina Hurricanes are 6-3-1 on the season, 0-1-1 this week. They would drop a game in Anaheim on the West Coast 4-2, and they would also drop a game in Columbus against the Blue Jackets 4-3 in overtime. So the Carolina Hurricanes did not have a great week this week, and the teams that were right under them, specifically the Capitals, kind of caught them sleeping and are surging, and they are able to dethrone them off the top of the Metropolitan Division for the first time this season. So the Hurricanes for the first 3 weeks were the top of the Metro, and this is the week where they were finally knocked off. Carolina has played some solid hockey, but they just haven't had, some great breaks. The Anaheim game was a fairly close game overall. That Columbus game really could have gone either way. It was a great game last night, a very entertaining game, and unfortunately they couldn't find the results, and that's what ended up doing them in last night. The goaltending is going to be seen as a little bit shaky now. They did give up 8 goals in the last 2 games, so you have to wonder what's going on with Mrazek. Mrazek did put up some really nice saves over the last couple of weeks. Are we starting to see him come back down to earth a little bit? Maybe there's just a blip on the radar. We'll have to wait and see. I know for a fact Rod Brendamore is going to, try and get the best out of these guys and try and remotivate them because they seem to be slipping a little bit right now. So with that, now that the Carolina Hurricanes are knocked off the top spot, that leaves one team left, and at the top of the Metropolitan Division, at the top of Capitol Hill, for the first time this season, the Washington Capitals are number one in the Metropolitan Division for this week's Power Rankings. 7-2-3 on the season, a 3-0-1 record this week, so 7 out of a possible 8 points for the Caps this week. They the past week played the New York Rangers in a home game where they beat the New York Rangers by a score of 5-2. They went up to Chicago to play the Blackhawks, won 5-3 in that one. They would head to Calgary and defeat the Calgary Flames 5-3. Unfortunately, last night was the outlier for the team over the past couple of games that they've played this week. They would play the Edmonton Oilers in Edmonton. They were up 3-2 with only a few minutes left, gave up a late goal in the third period, ended up losing that game to the Oilers 4-3 in overtime. But overall, besides that, the Washington Capitals have looked good, and they really deserve the top spot in the Metro right now. They have the most points in the Metro with 17 points in that division. So they're playing some good hockey. They're finding ways to get wins. And some of those games that maybe they could have lost in regulation ended up losing in overtime. So they picked up a couple of extra points, and that ends up making a difference at the end of the day. So Washington Capitals are at the top of the Metro this week. So just as a quick rundown, at number 8, the New Jersey Devils. Number 7, the New York Rangers. At number 6, we have the Philadelphia Flyers. For the highest ranking this season, the Columbus Blue Jackets move up to number 5. At number 4, the Pittsburgh Penguins slip down to 4. The Islanders move up to the highest they've been this year, up to number 3. The Carolina Hurricanes slip from their top spot at number 2. And the Washington Capitals are the only other team besides the Hurricanes to hold down the top spot in the Metro this year. So let's take a look at the Atlantic Division. All right, so taking a look at the Atlantic Division in the Eastern Conference, there wasn't too much of a shakeup. There was one or two teams that were able to take advantage of another team struggling, but besides that, the top teams pretty much stayed in the same place. But taking a look, starting at number 8, no movement here. We have the Ottawa Senators staying at number 8 in this week's Power Rankings. They are 2-6-1 this season, 1-2 this week. They would lose to the Arizona Coyotes on the road 5-2 in Arizona. They would lose to the Dallas Stars on the road 2-1. But they would pick up a victory against the struggling Detroit Red Wings at home by a score of 5-2. So the Ottawa Senators didn't fare so well on their trip in the Southwest. They would lose to the Coyotes, who have been playing well. And suddenly the Dallas Stars seem to be surging over the past 2 or 3 games. And they beat a Detroit Red Wings team that's really not that much in that much better of a situation than themselves. So they pick up a victory there. Overall, the Ottawa Senators have some issues. They have some injuries here and there. Anthony Duclair is playing fairly well right now for those Ottawa Senators, so that is a bright spot. Tkachuk is playing well also. Craig Anderson, is a little bit concerning to me. I've said that before, but, how much more is he going to be able to play? Anders Nilsson really is not the best second option in the NHL for the Ottawa Senators. They got to figure out what they're going to do with that. They just re-signed him, but you got to find a way to get something out of this situation. They're just a very young team. They're continuing to rebuild, but 2-6-1 is not a great record for the Ottawa Senators right now. So taking a look at number 7, actually moving down a spot from last week, and I had these guys so high up only a couple of weeks ago, but the Detroit Red Wings have slipped all the way down to number 7 this week in this week's power rankings. 3-7 on the season. They were a perfect 0-3, so they did not win a game this week. They would lose in Edmonton 2-1 to the Edmonton Oilers. They would drop a game at home against the Vancouver Canucks 5-2, and they dropped the game against the aforementioned Ottawa Senators in Ottawa by a score of 5-2. And something that I noticed is becoming a theme with the Detroit Red Wings is how good they were playing offensively from Anthony Mantha in the first week. Some of those other young guys that they had, that's pretty much evaporated at this point. This is another team like the Ottawa Senators. I'm not too sold on the goaltending. Jimmy Howard has not looked so great in a couple of these games. He just, I don't know. It's one of those things. He's getting older at this point. He's almost in his 40s. How much more does he have in the tank? Is he good for maybe 30 games? Jonathan Bernier, he seems to not be having as great of a year as he did last year. Remember last year, he had a pretty good season, but the team did miss the playoffs. There's a team continuing to build. I think they feel better about this record because they know what the team will be in the future, knowing that Stevie Y is at the helm. But in terms of performance on the ice right now, they looked very good at the beginning of the year. One of the top two or three teams in the division in the first 2 weeks of the power rankings. But since then, the Detroit Red Wings have taken a very big nosedive to the bottom of the division. So taking a look at number 6, moving down a spot as well, we have the Montreal Canadiens. So the Montreal Canadiens are 4-1 on the season, 1-2 this week. They would pick up a victory over the St. Louis Blues, who they've had their number this week, a 5-2 victory over the St. Louis Blues. They would lose to the Minnesota Wild in Minnesota, a heartbreaking game by a score of 4-3, a game that maybe the Canadiens felt they could have won. And then they lose last night in another tough game at home, a 4-2 loss over the San Jose Sharks. In a game that, again, it seemed like Montreal may have had some momentum. The San Jose Sharks were actually up 2-1. Then they scored, and then it was 3-1. And with about 40 seconds left, if you went to grab your popcorn too early toward the end of the second period, you made a mistake if you were at that game in Montreal, because less than 40 seconds left to go, the San Jose Sharks pick up a 3-1 or a 4-1 lead. It seems like they're going to be running away with this game. It's toward the end of the period. The Bell Center goes absolutely quiet. You could hear a pin drop. But with only a few seconds left in the period, the Canadiens will come down the ice. Max Domi would throw a shot on net, get deflected by Yoel Armia, and it would be deflected. Perfect deflection by Armia, and it's a 2-goal game again. And it seems like the Canadiens are coming into the third period with momentum and a little bit of life. Unfortunately, that did not last. They did not get that momentum in the third period. San Jose Sharks had some motivations after what happened with Logan Couture's comments the other day. They were able to respond. They pick up a big victory on the road in Montreal. And the Montreal Canadiens lose again. They're 1-2 this week. Their record is okay. They're 4-1. They have 9 points on the year. It's not terribly bad yet, but a team that's supposed to make the playoffs. Shea Weber's in the lineup. Carey Price is in the lineup. Your top guys are in the lineup, and they're not finding a way to get things done right now. You wonder if a guy like Ryan Poehling, how long is it going to be till he possibly gets a call up and a good look this season? We've seen some good signs. We saw Nick Suzuki score his first NHL goal. Victor Mete, who was very well overdue for his first NHL goal. There's signs of life from Montreal, but I think the lack of inconsistency, specifically on that defense, is a little bit of an issue. And how much scoring power do they really have? Jonathan Drouin, has had issues now in Montreal. When are they going to start calling up more of that youth to see what they have? It's only a matter of time. So moving up, the big team that moving up 2 spots from number 7 last week, we have the Florida Panthers, 4-2-4 this season, 2-0-2 this week. They dropped a game at home against the Colorado Avalanche, who have been arguably the hottest team in the NHL. a 5-4 overtime loss in that game. So they would lose that game to the Colorado Avalanche. They would go into Nashville to take on the Nashville Predators in Nashville and get a 3-2 shootout victory there. They would head up to Pittsburgh and beat the Pittsburgh Penguins, who had a pretty rough week this week, as we mentioned. A 4-2 victory for the Panthers there. They would head up to Calgary and lose that one in a shootout 6-5 in a shootout barn burner in Calgary. So the Florida Panthers, again, there's another team like Columbus, played a lot of post 60-minute hockey this week, and they found a way to pick up some very valuable points. Florida didn't start the season too well. They were toward the bottom of the division. Bobrovsky seemed to be struggling in his new home there in Florida. But now that the team has started to build some chemistry and get things going a little bit, get a little settled, the Panthers are playing some pretty good hockey, 4-2-4, still under 500, but they're finding a way to pick up points, 4 overtime points extra. You take away those points, they only have 8 points. They have 12 points on the season right now. So, some would argue those are points that maybe they should have gotten 2 instead of 1. But at the end of the day, they're toward the top of that division. And this is important for the Florida Panthers, a team that's really looking to get on the rise this year and really show that they are a true contender for the playoffs this year. Not just a bubble team. They want to be a contender this year, and they have plenty of time to do that. If they haven't bottomed out at any point in the first 2 weeks, I think the focus is just trying to stay good enough just to make the playoffs. And I think they're gonna, if they catch a good run here or there, a good 5 or 6 game winning streak, that could be huge for the Florida Panthers. The question is, will they? Unfortunately, they won't like who's ahead of them because they're a rival. But at number 4, staying at number 4, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning, 5-3-1 on the season, 1-1 this week. They would drop a game to the surging hot Colorado Avalanche, 6-2, an embarrassing game at home there for the Tampa Bay Lightning, but they would pick up a victory over the Pittsburgh Penguins in a last-second goal by Victor Hedman, leading the Tampa Bay Lightning to victory over Pittsburgh 3-2 in regulation. That Colorado game I think was a little bit of a outlier. Colorado really is a very good hockey team, but was it the kind of test that maybe Tampa Bay, maybe not overlooked, but maybe they just seem to have a little bit of a lack of focus here early in the year. The criticism is they're trying to make the perfect plays and the highlight reel plays, and they're not focusing on, just scoring dirty goals in front of the net off a rebound or off a weird carom. They aren't doing that much. They're looking for the pretty goals, and unfortunately, it's affecting the team a little bit. They're all going for individual stats, it seems like, and that's like another team that we'll mention in a minute. But overall, Tampa Bay, they did beat Pittsburgh, a team that's, they probably should have beaten, a team that struggled this week. So the Colorado game may have just been an outlier. We know how good Colorado is, but that lack of focus may be there a little bit here early in the year for Tampa Bay. And I got to tell you, it is still so weird seeing Kevin Shattenkirk with a Tampa Bay jersey. It's still very weird. Staying put at number 3, we have the Toronto Maple Leafs, who are 5-4-2 on the season, 1-1-1 this week. So they picked up a victory over the bitter rival Boston Bruins at home, a 4-3 overtime victory in that one. They would play the Columbus Blue Jackets, lose that one 4-3 in overtime. And then they would head to Boston, and Boston would get their revenge in Beantown 4-2. That was the loss for the Toronto Maple Leafs this week in regulation. Toronto's taking a lot of criticism. They're under a microscope there. The rumors about Mike Babcock, is it ready to let him go and things like that. I got to tell you, Mike Babcock is a guy that he may not be the right fit for this team, and I think it's still too early to let go of Mike Babcock, but you don't want to wait too long to the point where you have players that are frustrated and angry and looking to move out. Austin Matthews has shown a little bit of frustration in interviews recently, saying something about family, sometimes fights and things like that. But there's definitely seems to be a disconnect, not only between Kyle Dubas and Mike Babcock, but between Mike Babcock and the players, and that could be an issue. How much longer does Mike Babcock stay with Toronto? It's very easy. It could very easily go one of two ways. They find a way to put some wins together. They buy into what Mike Babcock wants them to do, or they just continue to do what they do. They seem to struggle, and they look for a scapegoat, which seems to be the head coach. It's a lot easier to move out Mike Babcock and bring someone new than it is to trade Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, John Tavares, so on and so forth on that roster. So if they're looking for a shakeup, it would likely be Mike Babcock. But overall, I don't think Toronto is playing that bad. Everybody's treating this team like the world is closing in on the Maple Leafs. Listen, they have not had a great start. They're 5-6 overall to start the year. They're losing more than they're winning. But is this something that can truly be fixed? And if it's something that could be fixed, is not an issue. If there are some other underlying things that we maybe don't know about or don't know in full detail, possibly about the player's relationship with Mike Babcock or player-player, relationships, that could end up hurting the Maple Leafs this year. And are they so confident coming into the year that they just assumed everything would come easy to them this year, that they could score so many goals, and they're not finding that right away? And the media is starting to attack them. The players are a little frustrated. And maybe is there a little bit of a lack of a presence in that room? Because we know what Patrick Marleau brought to this team. Again, I'm not knocking a player like John Tavares, but is there something to it? Because we saw what Marleau brought last year. We've seen other players as well. Roman Polak in the past. Just a calming presence in the room. This is a very young hockey team, not only on the offense, but on the defense now. And really, you've got Jake Muzzin and Tyson Barrie, and everybody else is fairly young or not, a huge leader-esque player. You've got Cody Ceci, Rasmus Sandin in the lineup at points. A couple of other guys that just happen to come up here and there. It's just a team that we don't know what they are, and I think it's still too early, but the frustration is in Toronto because they expect to be at the top, and rightfully so. They expect to be at the top for the right reasons. Look how much they're paying Mitch Marner, John Tavares, and Austin Matthews. They deserve a little bit of pressure under them. The amount of money they're getting paid, the product isn't really much better. It may even be worse than the first 10 games last season. So that's something to keep an eye on with Toronto. But in my opinion, they're doing just fine, and they're in the top 3 in that division. And the only reason they aren't higher up, they haven't been playing the best themselves, but these other two teams have been red hot to start this season. Moving down a spot, these two teams have been interchanging, maybe leading back to a rivalry between these two teams. The Boston Bruins get knocked off the top spot this week. They go down to number 2 this week. 6-1-2 on the season. 1-0-1 this week. They did lose that game over the Toronto Maple Leafs in Toronto, 4-3, an overtime loss. And their only other game coming, that sweet revenge game they had back in Boston, 4-2, which was a victory over the Leafs. So Boston, it seems pretty crazy that they're 6-1-2. They've only lost one game in regulation, and they are in second. That just shows you how good the team ahead of them, just how good they have been this year. But overall, Boston's goaltending, whether you throw in Tuukka or you throw in Yaroslav Halak, the goaltending tandem has been very good for this Boston Bruins team. The defense is playing very well, and they're getting depth scoring throughout the lineup, and that is a huge difference maker, considering they lost a couple of guys on that depth over the year. They lost Marcus Johansson from last year, who they picked up as a rental. They lost Nola Chari. So they lost a couple of guys on that back end. They seem to be filtering guys right in, and they're playing just fine right now. They sit second in that division for the rankings. So Very good results from the Boston Bruins. And the only reason they did not get number one because of the team ahead of them is just so good right now. Through 11 games, the Buffalo Sabres have won 8 of 11 to start the year, and they are the number one team in this week's Power Rankings. Jack Eichel's Buffalo Sabres. The Buffalo Sabres to start the year are 8-2-1 on the season, 2-1 this week. They would beat the San Jose Sharks 4-3 in San Jose. They would come back home for the second of a home and home with the San Jose Sharks. On the East Coast, they would win that one 4-3 in overtime. It took overtime that time, but they did get the victory over the Sharks. They unfortunately did have a tough game last night after those 2 games against the Sharks. They may have been able to pick apart a team like the Sharks, but seemingly early in the season, a little bit more of a desperate New York Rangers team who's sort of demanding a little respect. The Buffalo Sabres come into Madison Square Garden and kind of get lit up. The New York Rangers win that game 6-2 last night, and it might have been a good wake-up call here for the Buffalo Sabres. They've been playing some really good hockey. Maybe they needed that little bit of a shake-up, a little bit of a ring in the bell against a Rangers team that is in your division, and the Rangers have not looked so great to start the year. No discredit to the Rangers. They had some really great goal scoring situations, but we saw some little mistakes. Rasmus Dahlin turning the puck over to Panarin, pretty much in the neutral zone. Carter Hutton seeming a little bit off here and there. He seemed like he was in slow motion for a couple of those goals. And I'm not saying because it was a slow-mo. He was in real time. It looked like he was in slow-mo. I don't know what happened with Carter Hutton last night, but overall, the Buffalo Sabres definitely, they were not ready for that game yesterday, and I really hope that things turn around for the Sabres because this is a great start for the Sabres. But I'm going to say it again. They were selling, really nice playoff tickets last November and December. They were nowhere near the playoffs in April, so just remember that. But it's a very good start for the Buffalo Sabres. They need to be consistent, and they need to keep this going the rest of the season. They can't have hot and cold, games here and there. You could have a game like this, but you need to come back and you got to win a game and just show that you can't let this snowball into a real issue because you could sit at 8-2-1 and sit at the top of the house and feel great, but the Buffalo Sabres need to be hungry and they need to stay motivated. We saw that with Tampa Bay sort of become an issue, specifically toward the playoffs, but it's very important that Buffalo stays focused, and they could be toward the top of the division this year. In what looks like a very solid division, you look at Tampa, Florida, Montreal, Detroit and Ottawa have kind of pulled themselves out of the race a little bit here, but you have Montreal, Florida, and Tampa who are right on the bubble, and you still have Toronto and Boston who are breathing down your neck. So Buffalo does not have a lot of leeway. We saw what happened with Pittsburgh this week. You have a couple of bad games, and all of a sudden you find yourself a little bit further down. So you got to be consistent. And Jack Eichel, he's had a good start to the year. He's arguably been one of the best players to start the year here. He's looking to prove something, and he is doing that so far this year. All right, so let's take a look at the Western Conference. All right, so to start things off, in the Pacific Division, we have a little bit of a shakeup at the bottom at number 8, moving down 2 spots this week. Fortunately, the San Jose Sharks, after going up 2 spots last week, up to number 6, are back down to number 8 this week. They gave us a tease. San Jose Sharks are back at 8, 4-5-1 on the season, 1-1-1 this week. They played the Buffalo Sabres in a home-and-home where they did not fare so well. The first game at home for the San Jose Sharks, they lost 4-3 at home. Then they would head to Buffalo and unfortunately have the same game, pretty much the same fate. They would lose 4-3 in overtime in Buffalo. Logan Couture called out some of his teammates for bad line changes in overtime, which led to the game-winning goal. And the team had a little bit of motivation. They came back last night. They played in Montreal, where they would pick up a 4-2 victory, a pretty nice game there for the San Jose Sharks. There was definitely some moments where it seemed like the Sharks were a little bit shaky. The bridge might have been falling in a little bit. Definitely toward the end of the second period, there might have been a lack of focus. They scored the goal with a little over 30 seconds left, and then gave up a goal with only less than a dozen seconds left in that period, just to give Montreal some hope. And you can't do that. They were able to get away with it, but these are the sort of things from San Jose. Even in a win, you could pick out something that really didn't go their way. They did play a very solid Buffalo team, one of the hottest teams in the league. So you could take with that what you will. And they played a good game in both games. They lost by a goal, one of them in overtime. And who knows, maybe if that line change, maybe if they scored before that line change, we wouldn't be talking about, all this controversy right now in San Jose. Okay, so looking at number 7, moving up a spot this week, we have the Los Angeles Kings at number 7 this week. They are 4-6 to start the season, 2-1 this week. They would pick up a victory over the Calgary Flames at home, a 4-1 victory. They would head to Winnipeg and defeat the Winnipeg Jets by a score of 3-2. They unfortunately headed to St. Louis to continue their road trip last night, where they did lose 5-2. The Blues just had too much power and too much intensity for the Kings last night. The Kings are this is frustrating for the Los Angeles Kings, because this team on some nights looks like a really good, solid hockey team, and other nights they just don't really seem to show up. They definitely are putting in more goals, over this past week than they had to start in the first 3 weeks of the year. But there's definitely some issues with this team. They are giving up they played fairly well this week. They gave up 8 goals in the 3 games, which isn't great, but considering in the first game against a pretty solid Calgary team, they gave up 1. They gave up 2 against that very potent offense there in Winnipeg. So again, it's like on and off. Jonathan Quick hasn't had a great start to the year himself, and the Kings' goal scoring was a little bit of an issue. They may be able to hide some of the issues with the goaltending recently because of the goal scoring finally coming alive for the Kings. But we'll see how things go from here. They move back up a spot, and hopefully they could continue to move up this week. So speaking of Calgary, Calgary Flames are at number 6, moving down a spot this week. They are 6-5-1 on the season, 2-2 this week. They lost to the Los Angeles Kings, as we just mentioned, 4-1 in Hollywood. They would head to the Anaheim Ducks in Orange County and defeat the Ducks 2-1. A major road victory there for the Flames. They would head home to play the Washington Capitals and lose that one 5-3 over the Caps. But then they would beat the Florida Panthers in a very thrilling game last night in a 6-5 shootout victory. A game that was 5-5 with less than 3 or 4 minutes in the game. And both teams scored late goals, came back, and the Florida Panthers just didn't have enough. And the Flames were able to escape a big game there against the Panthers. Again, the Flames definitely have some issues here and there. They're finding a way to win, but they are only 500. They're 6-5-1. This team's expected to make the playoffs this year, but there's definitely some issues with this team. Maybe the goaltending. There's a little bit of a transition issue. Cam Talbot coming in, so we'll have to see what happens. But the Calgary Flames, there's definitely room for improvement. But again, it's a team that's changing a little bit on the fly, but they pick up some wins. They beat a pretty solid Anaheim team. They did lose to the Kings on the road, but the Kings had a fairly good week this week. They played the Capitals, who rose up to the top of the Metro this week, as well as the Florida Panthers, who moved up in their division this week as well. So they played a couple of pretty solid teams over the past week, but it was an indication that they maybe aren't in that upper echelon. Unfortunately, that's why they are at number 6 in that Pacific Division. Okay, so taking a look at number 5, sliding down a spot, is the Vancouver Canucks at number 5 this week. They were originally number 4 last week. They moved down to 5. 6-3 to start the season, 2-1 this week. They lost to New Jersey Devils on the road in New Jersey against a Devils team that really struggled to start the year. They would lose that one 1-0. They would beat the New York Rangers, however, in MSG, 3-2. So a big victory there in a matinee game on Sunday for the Canucks. But then they went on to play the Detroit Red Wings and pick up a victory on the road in Little Caesars Arena in Detroit, a 5-2 win for the Canucks. So the Canucks road trip has not been all bad. We saw how bad things got last season when they first went on the road trip to the East. They really it's been a house of horrors for that team. They did not do too well on the road last year. It pretty much took away their playoff hopes early in the year. They were playing some really good hockey on the West Coast. They just couldn't transition that to the East when they went on the road. But they fared pretty well. They beat the New York Rangers, who just played a very solid game last night against one of the hottest teams in Buffalo. And they also beat the Detroit Red Wings, a game that they should have won, and they found a way to get it done on the road. Definitely some things here and there with Vancouver. We like, some of those guys that they have in that lineup, Pettersson and Bo Horvat being the new captain. So definitely some good things with this team, but it's very exciting that the goaltending seems to be in form a little bit in Vancouver. And they're 6-3 to start the year, so a pretty good start for the Vancouver Canucks. So this is the drastic change in the Pacific Division, as we have moving up 3 spots, up from number 7 up to number 4. We have the Arizona Coyotes, who are 5-3-1 on the season and 2-1 this week. They would play the Ottawa Senators and beat the Sens 5-2 at home. They would head to New York and beat the New York Rangers in overtime, 3-2 in an overtime win there. Unfortunately, dropping the game to the New York Islanders last night, a 4-2 loss on Long Island. A game where they kind of just fell off, but before that, they were 5-0-1 for a stretch. So they lost the first 3 games, and then they went 5-1. They were on a 6-game point streak heading into last night's game. They've had a very solid past 2 weeks. It doesn't really show. They were 2-1 this week. That's all right. But they really dominated those games against Ottawa and the Rangers. And even though the Ranger game went to overtime, the Coyotes were playing some very solid hockey. They had not trailed a game in, I believe, 3 or 4 games for the Coyotes since last night against the Islanders. So, this is a real Arizona team. They seem to be for real this year. Phil Kessel looks really good for the Coyotes. Connor Garland leading the team in goals already with 5 or 6 goals. He's playing very solid for the Arizona Coyotes. And the goaltending in Darcy Kemper, he has looked very solid. And that's been the story for the beginning of the season here. Not only in Arizona, but a lot of the NHL is how good your goaltending is. It really rides on how well you perform and your overall record. And Darcy Kemper, I love his aggressiveness. He's punching guys in front of the net and slashing and just getting aggressive. He's always been like that, but I love watching Darcy Kemper when he's in net in Arizona. So a good week for the Arizona Coyotes. They probably should have moved up a little bit last week because we kind of saw this coming with this team. They've been good for now 2 weeks, but they finally get that recognition this week. Okay, so at number 3, moving down a spot is my Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks are 6-5 on the season and 1-3 this week. So a disappointing week overall for the Anaheim Ducks. They seem to be mortal at this point. That defense is, the fort is falling a little bit here for the Anaheim Ducks. But they did pick up a victory in the beginning of the week, a 4-2 win over the Carolina Hurricanes, who have been pretty solid. They struggled a little bit over the past 2 weeks, but still, nonetheless, a solid victory for the Ducks. They would then play the Calgary Flames in a tight game, really just a great road game by Calgary, a 2-1 victory for the Calgary Flames in that one. They would head to Nashville. This was not too good. They did lose that game in Nashville 6-1, so not a great game there. They just gave up a lot of goals, and that strong defense was really tested and pretty beat up. And then last night, this is the one that really concerned me the most this week. They would head to Dallas and give credit to Denis Gurianov scoring 2 goals in the first period for the Dallas Stars, and that was it. The Anaheim Ducks did pick up a goal from Nick Ritchie in the second period, but besides that, it was all Dallas. And unfortunately, that's been the last 2 games now. They're on a 3-game losing streak. That first game was Carolina, and the rest of the week they have lost. And some pretty brutal games as well. I mean, Calgary is a divisional opponent. Nashville is a conference opponent as well as Dallas. So these are tough losses. Dallas, who is toward the bottom of their division, as we'll get into, they have really struggled this year to score goals. But I mean, give Ben Bishop a lot of credit last night. The Ducks really fought in that toward the end of that game, but it's still concerning. You did not find a way to get another goal in there, but it happens here and there. It was a road game, but there is something a little bit worrying about the Anaheim Ducks right now. They had a young line. They had Troy Terry, Comtois, and Steele, I believe, on the same line. So we're seeing the youth. Getzlaf did not play that great last night. I don't think that's going to be a popular opinion, but he has not really shown me, he's not playing at his best right now. So that's a little bit concerning with Getzlaf. But John Gibson's going to keep this team in as many games as he can, and he tried to do that this week, unfortunately to not much of an avail. So let's take a look at number 2, moving up a spot, is the Vegas Golden Knights. They are 7-4 to start the season, 2-1 this week. They would pick up a road victory to start things off in Pittsburgh. Marc-Andre Fleury heading back to Pittsburgh, a 3-0 shutout for him and the Golden Knights in that one. They would head home to play the Philadelphia Flyers, a 6-2 loss where the Flyers dominated that one in Vegas. And then the Chicago Blackhawks, they head to Chicago and pick up a 2-1 shootout victory in Chicago. So Vegas Golden Knights, a team that's definitely had their moments here and there where they haven't played their best, but then they've also played really well at other moments. This is a very stable team. I think Gerard Gallant has this team in a good mindset. 7-4, a pretty solid start to the season. And if the team ahead of them has a tough week next week, wink, wink, they could be moving back up and possibly to that top spot. So Vegas has looked good. They're just playing consistent hockey. They're not playing super great. They're just not having any really bad weeks. You go 2-1 week after week after week. That's a pretty good record for the Golden Knights. So we'll have to see what happens. But overall, the Golden Knights are putting together a pretty strong start to the season so far. So that leaves us to number 1, staying at the top of the Pacific Division. As good as Vegas was this year, they've not been able to get back to that top spot where the Edmonton Oilers stake their flag at the top of the Pacific Division. Once again, 8-2-1 to start the season. 2-1-1 this week. They would pick up a victory over the Detroit Red Wings at home, a 2-1 win. They would head to Winnipeg and lose to the Winnipeg Jets 1-0 in a shootout loss. They played the Minnesota Wild in Minnesota and lost that one. But then they came back and had an unbelievable performance back at home at Rogers to defeat the Washington Capitals 4-3 in overtime. They were down with less than 3 minutes left. They scored a goal, a little over 2 minutes left, tying the game, sending it to overtime, and picking up the victory. So a big game there against a very solid Washington Capitals team. A great way to end the week for the Oilers and pretty much solidifying their spot at the top of the division. Now, let's go through each game. The Detroit Red Wings game. This is a game that you got to find a way to win. Detroit struggled a lot over the past almost 3 weeks now. They really started off that first week really strong, but since then has really struggled. Meanwhile, they did lose to the Winnipeg Jets on the road. They did not score a goal against a Winnipeg team that definitely has a little bit of a deficiency in in that defensive side in the back end, but goaltending was able to stand on its head and make the difference in the game there in that one. The little bit more concerning one was the Minnesota game where they lost to the Wild 3-0, so they got shut out twice against two arguably weaker defensive teams in the league. It's a little bit concerning for the Oilers moving forward, but then they come back and defeat the Caps at home in a very hard-fought game. So the Oilers, they could move down to number 2 as soon as next week if they let games like the Wild and the Winnipeg games, they continue to let those games slip, they will very easily find themselves back down into the middle of the pack. But overall, I can't bash the Edmonton Oilers. Mike Smith in goal has been so good for the Edmonton Oilers. He's made a huge difference. Dave Tippett has done a great job with that team right now in Edmonton. They're all contributing, and I gotta tell you, this team just looks different than the Oilers team probably since I've started watching hockey in the early to mid 2000s. The Oilers just look like a different team. I just remember all I remember about the Oilers over the past almost 2 decades is a team that really struggles to even be mediocre. It's a winning season if they're mediocre, and it's an average season if they're at the bottom, picking in the top 5. The oil change series really just, I can't believe those are still on the internet. I'm surprised Edmonton even allows that. Maybe it's just a recollection to remember just how bad things have been in Edmonton. There were, nonetheless, the lows and whatever, they're all gone pretty much at this point. But the Edmonton Oilers are in a new direction. Not only, they do have Daryl Katz as the owner, but overall this team seems to be going in the right direction with Ken Holland. There were a couple of questions. He's not the best with handling salary cap and things like that. Well, he did a pretty good job getting rid of Lucic and bringing in James Neal, who is a very solid player to start the year, and as well as bringing in Mike Smith, who's been probably one of the hottest goaltenders to start the season this year, as well as having your usual guys like Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. It's kind of crazy what a goaltender and another winger seems to do for the Edmonton Oilers. We know how good Leon Draisaitl is, and we know how good, obviously, Connor McDavid is. You add a goaltender to this team, which they did, and you add a guy that can just play with one or both of those guys in James Neal, and this team is finding some success early in the year. Because if you've got only one guy going, they shut that guy down, the opponent, and that's pretty much it. But if you have a good goaltender, you could stay in a maybe close 1-2-1 game. And you need also some scoring depth just to give the opponent another guy to pay attention to as well. So the Oilers finding some success. Ken Holland definitely, I don't think, is terribly happy with the team right now. Not necessarily in terms of the performance, but I think the personnel, he would definitely like to improve that. He said that throughout most of the summer. Didn't really find the right move or the right fit, but the team is making things work. And remember, they do have a guy, Jesse Puljujarvi, who, if he could play well in Europe, could easily be moved if they could find the right fit there. So we're going to have to keep an eye on the Oilers, but definitely a little bit of a weak, a not so great week for the Oilers. Probably one of their weakest stretches so far this season. So with that being said, let's take a look. It's the San Jose Sharks at number 8. Number 7, we've got the Los Angeles Kings. Number 6, the Calgary Flames. Number 5, the Vancouver Canucks. Number 4, we've got the Arizona Coyotes. Number 3, the Anaheim Ducks. Number 2, the Vegas Golden Knights. And at number 1, the Edmonton Oilers. Let's take a look at the Central Division. All right, so starting things off at number 7, we have the Minnesota Wild to drop back to the bottom of the Central Division this week. The Minnesota Wild are 2-8 through 10 games to start the year. They are 1-2 this week. They lost to the Montreal Canadiens at home 4-3. They beat the Edmonton Oilers at home, getting a shutout over the Oilers 3-0, and then dropping a game in Nashville last night 4-0. So overall, the Minnesota Wild have not started the year too well. Obviously, they're 2-8. The goaltending has been okay. Devin Dubnyk has looked okay. Alex Stalock, not so much, in my opinion, but um, there's something to build off with the Oilers game. Maybe the Oilers were sleeping a little bit, but again, still a victory, and it's a shutout against Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and James Neal, who was very hot to start the year. So, a big win there, but they got to find a way to just get some consistency going. And now that Kevin Fiala is out possibly for a little while, the Minnesota Wild are going to have to ask for a little bit more from the depth to get things going. And, we're going to have to wait and see. Ryan Suter has definitely regressed a little, as well as Zach Parise. Definitely Zach Parise is frustrated right now. They got to figure out a way to get this team out of its current funk. But a good victory there in Edmonton against Edmonton can hopefully build them into the right direction moving forward. Okay, so not much to say there. They're 2-8. I'm sorry, Minnesota, but it's definitely a tough start to the year. At number 6, moving up a spot, we have the Dallas Stars, 4-6-1 this season, 3-1 this week. They did lose to the Pittsburgh Penguins in Pittsburgh 4-2. They beat the Philadelphia Flyers 4-1 in Philly, so a big victory there. They did play the Ottawa Senators at home, a 2-1 win for Dallas, as well as playing the Anaheim Ducks last night where they won 2-1. So again, some good wins here and there. They had to play in Pennsylvania earlier this week. They found a way to get things done there. And then, you find a way to win at home, and that's important. Again, Ottawa, all right, Ottawa isn't the best, but you still find a way to win, as well as beating Anaheim, who has been a pretty solid team to start the season, maybe struggling a little bit more so the last 2 weeks. But nonetheless, they find a way to build up a little bit, maybe get some confidence going in Dallas. I know last night it was the Gurianov show, scoring 2 goals against the Anaheim Ducks, and that was the difference. And Ben Bishop has played very well to start the year, so that's something also to keep an eye on with the Dallas Stars. So taking a look at number 5, staying put at 5, pretty much because a lot of the other teams really haven't been all that great ahead of them, and they haven't been bad enough to go below them, is the Chicago Blackhawks at number 5, 2-5-2 to start the season, 1-3-1 this week. So the Chicago Blackhawks had some hockey games this week. They played the Columbus Blue Jackets 3-2, where they would pick up an overtime victory at home, a 5-3 loss at home over the Washington Capitals. They would head back and play the Vegas Golden Knights, lose that one over the Golden Knights in a shootout, which they lost by a score of 2-1. Then they would play the Dallas Stars at home, the Philadelphia Flyers at home, where they would drop that one to the Flyers 4-1. So this team is still very, again, they're starting to show their colors now that they are playing a little bit more hockey, but I'm definitely not impressed with this team. They're 2-5-2 this year. I could have probably had Dallas ahead of them because of they had a much stronger week than the Chicago Blackhawks. But I don't know, Chicago. I haven't seen a ton of Chicago, but that the Washington game, it was a little bit of a shootout back and forth. That could be an advantage for Chicago that they were able to score against them. Columbus, who has looked fairly good over the past week, so that's a pretty big victory. They played a tight one against Vegas. It took a shootout to decide that one. And then the Philly game was really the only game that I feel like they really lost. Again, you're going to have those games. They were on a homestand here, and they just couldn't find a way to get things done necessarily. So, Chicago is in a little bit of a retool, maybe a rebuild. They don't, they're kind of whispering that word rebuild in Chicago, but it's definitely in that sort of mode. Stan Bowman's doing his best. Jeremy Colleton's doing what he can do, but this team is definitely in a transition, and we're seeing that a little bit right now. And Jonathan Toews, who has struggled a little bit here to start the year, he's not getting any younger. Just something to keep an eye on there with the Blackhawks. So, taking a look at number 4, moving down 2 spots this week, is the Winnipeg Jets, who are 5-5 this season, 1-1 this week. They would beat the Edmonton Oilers 1-0 in a shootout victory, so a big victory specifically for that defense for the Winnipeg Jets, who's been criticized a lot to start the year, including myself. They were able to shut down Connor McDavid, James Neal, and Leon Draisaitl, and were able to beat a very good goaltender in Mike Smith. It did take a shootout, but nonetheless, they did find a way to win a very important game in that one. They did lose to the Los Angeles Kings in their second game, though, by a score of 3-2. So it was a close game, but they did lose that one. Winnipeg is just, I'm very concerned about that defense. They did pick up Lucas Spiza. Probably should have gone to Anaheim, so that's a little bit upsetting, but that's the NHL. It's not about the human. It's about what they bring, and unfortunately, it is a business. And Lucas Spiza was a victim to that. So, fortunately, that's what happened there. So Winnipeg picked him up. So they had a little bit of depth. They've definitely gotten a little bit banged up on already a weak defense. Got even weaker over the past 2 weeks. So it's good that they add someone in there. Maybe some of those young guys that they've been bringing up aren't ready for the NHL. So you bring in Spiza, who can kind of fill that void that they desperately are lacking right now. So that leaves moving up a couple of spots this week. Moving up a spot is the St. Louis Blues up to number 3. So the St. Louis Blues are 5-2-3 to start the season, 2-1 this week. They went to Montreal and lost to the Montreal Canadiens 5-2. They lost last week 6-2 to the Montreal Canadiens. So they've had their struggles against the Canadiens to start the year this year. I believe that's the last time they'll play the Canadiens, so that's good news for the Blues. They would beat the Colorado Avalanche, though, at home, a 3-1 victory for the Blues, as well as beating the Los Angeles Kings last night 5-2 in a pretty nice game there. So the Blues definitely are another team. They had a really a tough week last week. Couple of games that they kind of gave away against Vancouver and the Islanders, but they come back this week. They were able to build. They picked up some points even in games they should have gotten 2. They were able to get at least 1 in those games last week, and then they were able to turn things around this week. They beat Colorado, who we'll talk about in a minute, is a very solid team to start the year, and St. Louis is kind of building their way back up to that. They're 500 on the season, 5-2-3. They have 12 points on the year, so they're doing fairly well. Considering some of those issues that they had last week, a little bit of a glitch, but hopefully it was just that, a little bit of a glitch. They build back this week. We're going to have to wait and see. But overall, the St. Louis Blues, hopefully are back on the rise moving forward. So number 2, the highest they've been so far in these power rankings, is the Nashville Predators, who had a very impressive week. 6-3-1 to start the season, 2-0-1 this week. They would lose to the Florida Panthers 3-2 in overtime. Earlier this week in Nashville, they would beat the Anaheim Ducks in convincing fashion 6-1 at home. Then they would beat the Minnesota Wild 4-0 last night. So again, they dominated the Anaheim game, and they dominated the Wild game as well. So they're dominating some teams in that conference. And even that Florida game, it was a little bit of a toss-up. It was a dogfight to the finish, and it ended up taking a shootout to figure out the winner for that one. So Nashville definitely had a solid week, and we saw Mikko Salomaki score last night. The goaltending has been playing fairly well for the Preds, and hopefully they are able to continue that, continuing now and possibly making a run possibly for that top spot in the Central next week if things happen to go their way. So that isn't the case this week, as Colorado remains at the top of the Central Division for the 4th week in a row. The Colorado Avalanche are 7-2 to start the season, 2-1 this week. A 5-4 overtime win in Florida. They would then play the Tampa Bay Lightning and win 6-2 in a very convincing game there, as well as they did take a defeat in St. Louis where they lost 3-1. But besides that, the Colorado Avalanche have looked pretty good. The Florida game being a very tight game. They really blew the doors off of Tampa, and that one, Tampa Bay might have been sleepwalking through that one. They really didn't look too good in that game. The St. Louis Blues team, the Blues have come back to life a little bit this week, so a good game there. It was only 3-1, so it was a close game. I'm not too concerned about Colorado, but Nashville's kind of catching up, so they need to be careful. But Colorado, can't say anything bad about them right now. You've got some really good goaltending so far from guys like Philip Grubauer, who have really continued to emerge from last season. Gabriel Landeskog has been very good up front, as well as Nathan MacKinnon. And the Colorado Avalanche are just continuing to move along. Some of that depth they added in the offseason with guys like Nazem Kadri have really made a difference for this team. And they're continuing to find ways to pick up wins. So just a quick recap of the Central. We've got at number 7, the Minnesota Wild. Number 6, the Dallas Stars. Number 5, the Chicago Blackhawks. Number 4, the Winnipeg Jets. Number 3, the St. Louis Blues. Number 2, the Nashville Predators. And staying at number 1 is the Colorado Avalanche. So that's it for this week's Power Rankings here in Week 4. We are a month into the NHL season now. And make sure to check out some of our other videos here at Goal Line Hockey. Check out our Instagram as well, at Goal Line Hockey. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.